I'm making this video to correct some misinformation about the pod stuff that was in my 9/11 Conspiracy Solved video. After I posted that, a lot of researchers, had a big problem with that pod stuff, and actually pointed me to a lot of better evidence that has, since changed my opinion on it. I had originally believed the pod theory because there was those experts saying that there was a pod there. I figured, they would know better than I do. So I really thought there looked to be something there in the evidence and all the pictures of all the different angles. It really looked like there was something there, and I thought that theory deserved a better, a second look from a lot of people. I thought it hadn't been paid enough attention to. I know it was covered in Loose Change first edition, and they were attacked pretty severely for that theory after putting that out. It was one of the big things that they jumped on. And immediately after that happened, there was a lot of disinfo that was put out on purpose about the no plane theory and no planes, saying no planes were used at all. And I used to counter a lot of that no plane disinfo with the pod thing because, hey, if it was no planes, why would they Photoshop or do a hologram plane with an extra piece of equipment attached to it? It was a good argument that I had used in a lot of debates before. I had kind of stuck with it because I thought that there may have been something there. There was those experts that were saying it, and I've really come around though since a lot of other researchers have, top 9/11 researchers and stuff have really pointed that out and showed me some much better evidence about the pod stuff, including Kevin Ryan and Aidan Monaghan, who directed me to a lot of really great links and sources, which I'll post in the description. I'm going to be doing an interview with Aidan Monaghan and discussing this pod theory and a whole bunch of other stuff to deal with the planes, because it really didn't touch on the planes much in that video. It was more about the World Trade Center, people inside it, and some of the crimes that were associated with Ground Zero itself. And I'd like to do a little bit more on the planes because it's really a confusing and convoluted subject for the whole 9/11 truth stuff. So I'm going to be doing this video and going over an interview with Aidan Monaghan. He's one of the top 9/11 researchers. He's author of a new book called Declassifying 9/11, which contains lots of documents from the government that he's gotten back from Freedom of Information inquiries. And he's got a lot of great research. He's probably one of the top people in the field. There's a lot of other people that are really much more seriously into this plane stuff. And if you know anyone who'd like to get on and do an interview and sort of, explain this stuff and clarify any of the evidence, please contact me by email and we'll get you on. And ladies and gentlemen, Aidan Monaghan, thanks for giving us your time. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've been trying to resolve some of those issues myself for the past few years through some intensive research and, as you were saying, freedom of information requests and so forth. Once I realized that the building destructions were likely the result of sabotage, I then concluded also that, therefore, the aircraft attacks themselves must have been somehow a related component of what we all witnessed that day, and that what was alleged probably wasn't correct.
Right, and that's the same kind of premise that I've gone on with a lot of the stuff myself, because I understand, because my background's in physics, and I've reviewed all the evidence for controlled demolition, and I know that those buildings were blown up from the inside. And it really strikes me as if they have these buildings, pre-planted for demolition, they're not going to trust these unskilled, pilots to really hit their targets. I mean, the thing is that what they did on 9/11 from a piloting capabilities, and I've gone on a lot of research for pilots for 9/11 Truth and things that they've said about, how these planes maneuvered. I've seen a lot of research done into the last 12 seconds of the video showing the flight UA-175 as it approaches the South Tower, and that expertly timed maneuvers and the flight characteristics of that plane, which just don't appear to be human-controlled maneuvers at all. I pretty much accepted the fact that these planes must have been flown by some sort of remote control technology, as we know from the documentation was coming of age just around that time. The remote control thing was really started off with what appears to be a pod on the underside of that plane as it approaches the buildings there. And I didn't believe it at first, but I had all those two pilots there that basically confirmed it. And I tend to trust those type of expert opinions, and it really does look like there's something there. But there are a lot of researchers, including yourself, who do not believe they believe that pod is in fact a reflection, as some of the other mainstream sources like Popular Mechanics have claimed, and that this theory of needing a pod to support the remote control plane theory was really unnecessary given the technological capabilities of remote control systems. And I'd like for you maybe elaborate on that a little bit more.
Sure. You referred to the apparent precision by which United 175 struck the second Trade Center tower. The first Trade Center tower impact by American 11 was witnessed by few, if any, and documented by even less. But the cameras of the world were affixed upon the Trade Center by the time the second plane had arrived. And although most of the video clips that we have seen only reveal the last 2 to 3 seconds of flight before impact, there is one in particular that happens to show the final 13 seconds as the plane is approaching the second trade tower. And when one examines this video, they can find, but through utilization of aviation formulas, known parameters that have been published in government studies such as NIST, that document the ground speed for the aircraft and at the time of its impact and approach and so forth. And when we coordinate all this information and utilize it within calculations, we can find that, for example, we can observe that the plane was banked at 20 degrees during its final five of the last 8 seconds of flight. And through that bank angle, in correlation with ground speed and so forth, we can determine the distance of the aircraft from the building and so forth. And basically what we can determine is that there was a high degree of precision involved. For example, we know that initially within the video that I referred to, the plane wings were horizontal. And then later, as it reemerges from behind the building, we see that it's banked at 20 degrees. So we can therefore reason that the plane at some point between the first second and the final 8 seconds performed a maneuver to bank the aircraft at 20 degrees. And this maneuver, were it performed a second sooner or later than it actually had occurred, would result in the aircraft having missed the building entirely, because you're traveling at a rate of what is known to be 799 feet per second for United 175. With the tower being only 208 feet wide, if you perform a turn, it's much like traveling on a freeway and missing an exit. You have to get off at a certain point, or you're going to miss your destination.
I was really impressed when I saw in the back of your new book, Declassifying 9/11, it shows all these calculations laid out right there in the back of the book, and I was like, wow, this is great. I'm a math guy. I thought that was really a really excellent approach that you took to sort of prove that, because I've seen a lot of the other videos and analysis of the last 12 seconds of that flight, and some of them that combine a lot of the angles and trajectories and try to show this, but you've really gone into mathematical exactness of the detail that's required to show just how precise of a timing, and that's a single maneuver. It's like the plane's level, and then it all of a sudden just banks at exactly 20 degrees, and it did so at the exact right time. And I just can't imagine a pilot, an unskilled pilot who's barely, passed flight training on a single-engine Cessna, having the capabilities and the technical precision to time that maneuver and do that sort of maneuver. It just boggles the mind.
Yes, and in fact, what we can also realize as well is that the maneuver itself occurred at least 1.6 miles before impact, possibly further, but we cannot know that for certain because the building was obstructing the view of the aircraft. But we know at some point between the first second and the final 8 seconds that somewhere in between there, the plane performed this banking maneuver. And given the distance and the obvious precision involved, one must consider that it probably wasn't under the control of an inexperienced amateur pilot. As well, what one needs to consider is the fact that there was a steady 11 mile per hour crosswind in place at that time, which had the potential to carry the plane off a given course by as much as 100 plus feet. So therefore, some consideration, some very precise consideration of the effects of this wind were taken into account and incorporated into this turn, which leads any reasonable investigator to seriously consider the use of automated avionics that were already aboard the aircraft, the autopilot systems, the flight control computers that can account for the effects of wind and the drift it can create during flight.
And those instruments to detect that sort of wind shear, those are actually on board regular commercial aircraft. They wouldn't need a wind speed, a measurement from the ground to coordinate that, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. Through a combination of I forgot the acronym term for it, VOR navigation systems, very high frequency omni-range receiver, GPS, onboard gyros, and within the flight control computer of typical commercial aircraft and even private aircraft, and for example, the flight control computers will calculate what is known as a wind triangle, and it accounts for the ground course, the ground speed, the airspeed, any potential effects created by lateral winds, tailwinds, headwinds, etc. And through these calculations, you can precisely navigate.
A lot of people think that there was a pod attached to the plane, and a lot of top researchers and stuff have rejected that hypothesis and stuff, and it really does look to me like there's something there from a lot of these angles. But in other angles, as you pointed out to me, that there are some faraway shots that show that appendage does not appear from like a head-on view of the plane. You could definitely see that the outline, there's no bulge there. And I just want to get to the bottom of this, because I did, cover that pod issue in my past video, and I'll explain the reasons for why I did that. First off, if there was a pod on that plane, that would mean that was not the original plane, or that there was a flight swap somewhere, or an extra piece of equipment added at Logan Airport. And really, it's either a drone swap hypothesis, which I originally supported because of the Operation Northwoods document, which details this drone swap scenario, and it's just those expert opinions of the pilots and stuff. Could you tell me some of the reasons why this theory and this what appears to be an appendage has been debunked, or go ahead and comment on that.
I believe, visually speaking, the reason there seems to be something there is given the unusual lighting arrangement at the moment some of these photographs were taken. The plane itself had flown just beneath the smoke cloud that was traveling out over toward the Atlantic Ocean, and it was an otherwise bright, very clear morning, and I think the contrast and the particular angle that the aircraft was at, facing directly into the sunlight, probably caused created what seemed to be, the appearance of an extra component beneath the aircraft. I've looked at several angles. Some of them do seem to show something three-dimensional, but I've looked at other angles of other photos, and there, in fact, does seem to be no evidence of any unusual attachments or so forth beneath the aircraft itself. And like you, once upon a time I thought, well, if the aircraft attacks themselves were a component of some sabotage, that, as you said, vis-a-vis the Northwood documents, that some type of swapping may have occurred, since the government themselves had already spoken of the use of such a method for a black op. But later on discovering what I did about typical commercial aircraft and the built-in capability to covertly perform what we saw on 9/11, I have since slowly, actually quickly, I departed from that point of view that the aircraft attacks themselves were the result of some plane swapping,
right.
Which would have just unnecessarily complicated any black op covert activity.
Right. From a logistics standpoint, that's one of the main reasons why I would tend to doubt it, because that just adds an entire layer of complication to the scenario, and also in terms of what happened to the original flights and the passengers on board and everything else, and all the things you'd have to coordinate. I originally considered Stewart Air Force Base, where both flights crossed paths simultaneously, as a possible drone swap location. Have you done any investigation into the radar data from that area, or that the transponders were shut off right around when they passed over that point? And maybe have you done any research or investigation into Stewart Air Force Base?
Not really. I'm not sure if there was any practical reason or way that it could have its proximity to certain events in the sky have affected events that unfolded up there. I have noted through research that there does seem to be an unusual coordination of certain events on certain aircraft that day that all seem to unfold at common times throughout the event timeline. As, for example, one aircraft is hitting the tower, another aircraft is going off course, or another aircraft is taking off from the ground at the airport. And there seems to be probably half a dozen of these different occurrences where one or more aircraft are experiencing significant events that were part of the event timeline.
And delays. Also, wasn't 93 delayed on the tarmac until pretty much the moment of impact of Flight 11, and then it was cleared for takeoff?
Yes, I think that may be the case. And other aircraft were going off course as other aircraft were taking off or hitting a target and so forth. And I'll have to retrieve that. I had once drawn up a little timeline of what these coincidences were, and I might have to retrieve that to refresh my memory exactly.
Yeah, that would be a useful tool for try to sift through this just dark maze of everything that happened that day. But now I want you to go on and talk a bit about the remote control and the automation technology itself, and why the pods were not even needed in your opinion. Why they didn't even need to have a pod attached. I mean, the technology's advanced far beyond the necessity of having an external appendage just to control the aircraft. And talk about some of the technical capabilities of every Boeing that has these. Apparently, you said they have these systems on board.
Yes, during the late 90s, the installation of these systems was begun. 97, 98, flight management systems, navigation systems such as augmented GPS, remote interface between ground controllers and flight management computers within the aircraft in the sky and so forth. The ability to remotely transmit via radio frequency an entire flight plan to an aircraft, to have it downloaded automatically within a flight management computer to be implemented at the flip of a switch or less.
Interesting.
This was all developed during the 1990s by Honeywell, Rockwell Collins.
Honeywell is a major producer of automation technology. They're one of the leading. They do home heating system, everything from home heating systems to large-scale industrial plants. So this is not beyond their capabilities to design an augmented GPS system for guiding aircraft. And apparently these things are on board every Boeing from that era. We could even get one of these planes. And one of the things I had read in Black 9/11, Mark Gaffney's book, was about the S-mode transponder, which is this sort of radio frequency transmission thing which allows the signals, and entire flight plans essentially could be uploaded to the planes themselves. And there was another mention of some sort of autopilot characteristics that was reprogrammed on, I guess, Flight 11 Mohammed Atta's aircraft, and that these types of autopilot programming things, in order for that to be done on board by the hijackers, it requires some very sophisticated programming knowledge, as well as you'd have to enter these things into like an onboard keypad and not make any mistakes in order for him to do it, and that would apparently require some serious technical capabilities. Have you heard anything about that, or comment on that for us?
Oh, sure, yeah. I cite a quote from a document obtained by the 9/11 Commission staff, within which a United instructor, a United pilot instructor, is quoted as saying that, in his opinion, the hijackers were not capable of causing autopilot mode changes due to the complications, and that even he himself, as an expert, would occasionally have to stop and pause and think about what he was doing in order to make sure that he was entering the correct changes, and to think that amateurs, in a very stressful situation with little time, could program these autopilots themselves is implausible, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's incredulous.
It would require precise knowledge of where you are, where you're going, how you're going to get there, and to plug in these waypoints, one after another during this stressful period where you're combating possibly passengers who are trying to, retake an aircraft from you. It's totally implausible, in my opinion.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't seem like that's what happened, or how these, sophisticated waypoints were programmed into the onboard computer system. It doesn't make any sense from a technical standpoint, and from just the whole idea of them being on board in that sort of stressful situation, and to have to program something in where if you make one mistake, or like, I know a lot of programming languages, you can remove a period and nothing works.
Yep.
So it's definitely hard to believe that. So these systems are on board, regular aircraft, and they have these sort of systems on board, and they would have been able. The government, I'm sure, had to have been aware of these types of things and their capabilities for actually, regaining control of hijacked aircraft, and even the possibility of landing them safely on the ground.
What most people don't realize even is that a typical commercial flight is only under the control of a pilot for approximately 3 minutes. That being the first 90 seconds during takeoff and the final 90 seconds during landing. The rest of the flight is performed by the autopilot systems.
Right, and they just have to know how to control the navigation and the different parameters and everything. But it would be interesting to get some of my friends who are professional pilots, even some of my friends that are now commercial airline pilots, to get their perspective on the capabilities of these types of systems, and also the fact that they're only in control of the plane really during a couple minutes during takeoff and during landing, and the rest of it's just done by remote control. And it's interesting that
or automation perhaps might be
automation
the better
is
term.
Probably the better word, because now it's interesting. You want to have anything else to say about this aspect of the planes that hit the towers, or any of the pod stuff, or anything else before we move on?
Oh, sure. Just real quick, if I may. I mentioned that the first 90 and last 90 seconds of a commercial flight are under the control of a pilot, typically, if not always. But in fact, the capability does exist for these planes, in fact, to take off by themselves and also land by themselves, which they do occasionally in low visibility conditions that require automation, because the pilot visually can't see what he's supposed to do. So these modern commercial airliners are essentially flying computers, And the automation that I referred to, the research and development period for this, was during the late 1990s, just before 9/11. It was being there was intensive research and development by the federal government in cooperation with other private corporations, airlines, and so forth. The precise GPS, augmented GPS that became available and is currently available today for a wide variety of uses was only activated just a year before 9/11. So everything was in place for really the perfect covert operation. These systems that were not operating officially, but were available. However, they were still under some research and development while they were being made available to the public. The procedures for their use, however, didn't become finalized in many cases until 2003, when the FAA finally approved many of the procedures that were being developed during the late 1990s and early 2000s. So the capability to covertly direct and crash these aircraft into the buildings, as we saw on 9/11, was entirely there. It was they were standard systems, nothing exotic, nothing extraterrestrial. It was all there, and it definitely is worthy of the same consideration that the official story is.
But I wanted to ask about
Sure.
the flash, because in addition to that pod thing, in that first version of Loose Change, it was Loose Change First Edition, and they show that flash thing, and they had said it was the pod was firing a missile into the building, but I don't believe that one bit. I had some speculation about this, and of course it is just speculation, and yeah, speculation does lead us into trouble a lot of times, and but what do you think are your opinions on that flash and what it could have been?
Yeah, I recall the speculation about missiles and so forth. I think if one examines the footage, and I think it's of the United 175 just before it hits, it's a camera angle from what looks to be from the east in Brooklyn, perhaps somewhere. And I think what one is seeing is the reflection of the sunlight upon the fuselage. It was like a streak that seemed to go left to right, and if one looks at it closely enough, it does seem to be nothing more than just a reflection upon the fuselage. With respect to these flashes that I'm aware of also, that coincide with the impacts of the aircraft, there's several different angles of United 175.
Right. And those angles,
hitting.
I mean, if it's a reflection of sunlight, then how does it reflect to all those different angles, to all those different cameras? You know,
right.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yeah. What you see in each video is a flash at the nose of the aircraft as it's just striking the building, just making contact with the building. And I believe what is probably being seen is the avionics compartment that is contained within the nose of every commercial aircraft virtually. The nose of a typical commercial aircraft is jam-packed full of electronic equipment. And I believe that may be what is being seen as the destruction and the instantaneous electrical reaction of that, upon destruction during impact. I think that's what these flashes are.
All right. Well,
however, in the case of the Not A footage of United, or rather American 11,
yeah,
it seems that there is some sort of flash, perhaps 50 feet to 100 feet before the plane hits the building. Whether that is some video artifact that was not intended to be viewed, or some other phenomenon, I don't know. It's unusual, although the footage was filmed from a half a mile away, so it could have been something else, but admittedly it's unusual. However, I think with the video footage of 175 hitting Building 2 and the flashes at the nose of the airplane, I believe it's probably just the avionics components being destroyed at impact and the instantaneous flash that would result.
Yeah. that's the thing, is that it definitely appears like it occurs before the plane impacts. So I had a couple theories that it was some sort of device inside the building, maybe that was detonated before the impact. But the thing is, the flash, it's a really pinpoint, very bright, intense white type of thing. It's not like an explosion. Now, I've heard some people say things about the wind speed, and the speed of the aircraft at those low ground velocities were not possible for. I've heard it for the Pentagon thing, but also I've heard it for these kind of claims for the World Trade Center as well. They said, like, oh, the wings would shear off the plane and they couldn't fly that way. And do you have anything to say about that? Because I don't really tend to believe that. I believe that those aircraft could have done what they did and what was observed without, any sort of modifications needed to be made. But is there anything on that you know of that holds any validity? Or
it's a valid question. However, I think, being that these were safety-centered systems, I think there was probably significant redundancy that was built into these airframes to account for extreme emergencies, for example, that allowed these aircraft to remain flying even under extraordinary conditions.
Well, I've been on planes we go through storms, and there's a lot of turbulence and stuff, and that can't be much more turbulence going through a storm with that sort of density of weather conditions as you would be at ground level going through that density of an atmosphere. Doesn't seem to me to be legit. The Pentagon, though, is a different story, because that was flying really close to the ground, and that one I'd be more willing to look into that sort of a thing than the whole World Trade Center thing. You know what I'm saying? Because
sure, yeah.
The thing that with that plane, Flight 77, that was traveling very close to the ground, and I don't know what are your thoughts on the Pentagon, because I seem to think that the whole plane thing is a distraction, because again, if you have a plane swap scenario or this type of thing where it was a missile and that the original plane was gone somewhere else, that just opens up a can of worms for the logistics end of the Black Ops end of trying to stage and plan something like this and coordinate it all without having any witnesses or anyone that could really come forward and talk afterward. If these are people, like I've heard some suggest that these people were there's a lot of top secret clearances on that plane that went into the Pentagon. And I've had some people suggest that these were people going into Black Ops programs and needed to fake their own death to assume a new identity. But that would mean those people are still around today and have the potential to go forward and sort of, discredit the entire notion that they were killed that day. And that just from a logistics standpoint, I don't see why they would add that level of complication into a plot like this, and especially expecting to get away with it for a long period of time. So,
yeah. It seems less plausible than other possibilities. With respect to the Pentagon, I know that certain official information, alleges that the aircraft was flying very low at a certain point at a very high speed and so forth. Although, based on research I've done, I found that there are certain reasons to wonder about the authenticity of this information. For example, most of all, if not all of it, was obtained from data downloads obtained from flight data recorders that were recovered from two of the aircraft. Through research, I was able to determine that in one case, the data file download was created prior to the device itself even being recovered, which automatically suggests some either mistake or some sort of fraud. And also that neither of these two flight data recorders had inventory control serial numbers attributed to them, as is standard practice during aircraft mishaps or accident investigations by the NTSB. During the previous 20 years before 9/11, there was only one other instance of such a case, and it goes directly to the topic of evidence authenticity. Can we be confident that the information that's been presented is authentic, in light of the fact that no inventory control serial numbers were attributed to these devices?
That's an interesting point because there have been some studies that show witness and then the debris field, the down light poles don't match up with the data that was actually on the recorder. And that's very easy for them to manufacture that type of evidence, as a lot of other evidence seems to be, appears to have been manufactured or at least planted with Mohammed Atta's suitcase being found at Logan with pretty much all the information on the hijackers, including his laptop computer with like future operations and all this. It just defies credulity that he wouldn't bring that or destroy that type of evidence, and that he'd leave it behind and compromise future missions if this was a real, Al-Qaeda cell operation. And there's so much evidence that appears to have been manufactured on 9/11. I wouldn't be surprised if those flight data recorders and the black box data that they've released wasn't manufactured as well, especially when it has direct disagreements with known evidence, such as the down light poles. And also, there's plenty of examples of that type of manufactured evidence from the passport that was found at Ground Zero by Bernard Carrick's department, and was later used as evidence in the Zacharias Moussaoui case. And this passport have pictures of it from the evidence photos for that case, and it's completely undamaged. It defies belief that passport went from a hijacker's pocket on board that plane through the building, through a fireball, and landed on the ground without any burning or anything. It's just
especially given that the flight data recorders and cockpit voice recorders for those two aircraft were never found, and these devices are indestructible, yet paper passports survived the same thing that destroyed these 4 devices I referred to.
So the titanium black boxes didn't survive, yet a paper passport did. It's just that's hard to believe. But as far as the plane and the capabilities of the aircraft and what happened at the Pentagon, I really I've tended to shy away from that issue because anytime you mention that it wasn't a plane, it was a missile, then you open up a can of worms. What happened to the original flight? What happened to the people on board that flight? We know a lot of them had held top secret security clearances and worked on Pentagon programs. Even the pilot was a participant in MassCal, the mass casualties simulated aircraft strike onto the Pentagon, and a lot of these other details that we know about the people on board that flight. And of course, there's a reason that those people would have been wanted to, it would have been very convenient after the fact to have those type of people with that information disappear. I think the whole thing with the plane and the distraction, and I've listened to a lot of interviews with Mike Rupert. He's the one, the first book I read, Crossing the Rubicon, that got me really woken up to 9/11 and everything. And he's done a series of interviews where he comments on this as well. One of them was on Joe Rogan podcast. And in that interview, basically Mike Rupert takes a stance that, this is is one of those things where they're trying to, to get people to focus on that issue, and if it becomes big enough, then they can just come out with the tapes, the 84 security cameras that they confiscated, and say, hey, look, it does show a plane. See, all these conspiracy theorists are crazy, and it will be like another straw man or another bait and switch, really, to say that, hey, we've disproven all these conspiracy theories. No one should believe this stuff, and it's kind of like one of their trump cards for if the movement ever does gain enough traction, they can sort of take that thing. That's sort of the opinion that he took on it, and he also said that he doesn't need that. He doesn't need that to convict Dick Cheney in a court of law for the NORAD stand-down orders, and he could convict him in front of any jury. And he does a great job of just showing that this is. And I tend to agree with him that it is a distraction. A lot of people say, oh, why do you say a plane hit the Pentagon? And I'm not saying that it did or it didn't. I haven't seen evidence either way to prove these theories. I've seen, some pictures that show very limited debris on the lawn. I've seen other pictures that show, quite clearly what appears to be airplane debris on the lawn. And there's just a lot of conflicting evidence and testimonies and various theories that are surrounding this. But I think what really trumps it of all is the logistics and the planning point of view of what happened to that original aircraft and how many the people on board that flight, if it was a missile, what happened to the original plane, and that's sort of what really gets me, and it makes me more tend to more believe that this was in fact Flight 77 that hit the Pentagon, and that a lot of these theories were started to take, in my opinion, a lot of them take the focus and attention away from that section of the Pentagon and everything that happened in the Pentagon.
Yeah. With respect to the Pentagon, I mean, there are numerous witnesses available who describe an American Airlines Boeing 757 flying into the building itself. I know, as you may also know, that there is a group who have been referred to as the Citizens Investigation Team.
CIT.
They have gone. Yes, they have gone to the scene itself, interviewed some important people there, and these people all described the plane as flying a completely different trajectory than that which is depicted within the flight data recorder download. And it raises the real question about whether the plane did fly the path it was alleged, and thus did it also cause the physical damage en route to the Pentagon itself before its impact. And I tend to wonder whether or not there was a deliberate effort to mislead the public about the direction from which the plane hit the building. I tend to believe it probably hit the building. There are measurements, for example, of photos that were taken of the outer facade before it collapsed, and the dimensions do measure up favorably with the dimensions of a 757. The distance between the engines and the approximate height of the fuselage and so forth.
Well, wasn't there a single impact hole? I mean, I didn't remember seeing two impact holes for, the engines would have been the most dense part of that aircraft. There wouldn't be just a single hole where the fuselage were. It would be if there was any impact holes in it, it would be from those engines. But because I thought that there was a single impact hole. There's two?
Well, what you see in some photos is there's the central hole that corresponds approximately with the dimensions of the fuselage, and then below and to the right and left of this hole, one will find that there is missing wall that approximates with the dimensions of the distances between each engine left and right of the fuselage. Then again, to have hit the way it did would be seemingly miraculous. It seemed to have hit the building at the lowest possible point it could possibly have hit without hitting the ground first. But then also there is there's little evidence of any wing impacts and vertical stabilizer impacts. Valid points, although I might add that these parts of the aircraft are very light by comparison. They're hollow aluminum structures, essentially, with perhaps not the mass required to penetrate such a reinforced building as it was. People are right to question whether or not really a plane did hit there. I mean, it does seem like a strange accident scene. There are some unexpected things visually that one sees in photographs of it and so forth. But then I consider other evidence also. For example, the C-ring hole, which is 300 feet deep into the Pentagon. Its creation seems to be a matter of intense debate, how it was created. Some have alleged it looks like something that was created by a portable rapid wall breaching device that are standard military equipment that are able to create perfect holes within brick walls, which is what we see with this C-ring alleged exit hole, through which only the tail nose gear at the front of the plane and the flight data recorder at the back of the plane were found. Everything else somehow was lost within the building, but miraculously right in front of this hole here, we have the tail landing gear and the nose landing gear and the flight data recorder, which is contained in the tail. Leading me to wonder as to whether or not perhaps maybe there was some effort to create a diversion in order to safely introduce a false flight data recorder away from the crash scene itself, thus meaning that I believe perhaps that the plane did hit the Pentagon, but via the highly speculated about north of Sitco trajectory that some more dedicated researchers may be familiar with.
Right, and I'd like to maybe try and contact some of those people as well, maybe get some of the other perspectives on this, because it's really a puzzle. The Pentagon, I think, of all the aircraft things, I mean, Shanksville is another just deepening mystery. There's a lot of different speculation going on about that, and with the Pentagon, I mean, just why they would capture all those 84 security cameras, it seemed very suspicious. And I remember those pictures of that C-ring punch hole, and that was just like, that had me believing the missile theory originally, back when I saw that, because I was like, what else can, puncture a hole like that in a building? And it's just, I don't know. It's really definitely a puzzle, and I think that maybe intentionally so, just so that it's just a quagmire to get everyone lost in and muck them down, trudging through all this mud, which never going to really lead them anywhere. Because even if we did, confirm that it was a plane or a missile, what is it? I don't really see like what it leads to of the reasons, why, and more importantly, who we can prosecute and bring accountable for these crimes, which is eventually, what's going to happen. That meeting in Kuala Lumpur, that was just happened about, prosecuting 9/11 war crimes, and there's a lot of discussion for this sort of thing going on, and in my opinion, it's just way more important to look at what that section of the Pentagon that was targeted and the reconstructions that were going on there. That AMEC was that company that was hired to reconstruct it before 9/11, and then they were, of course, hired to do the construction after 9/11. And the fact that no AMEC employees were in that section of the Pentagon that day, and that a lot of offices had been moved around, including the Office of Naval Intelligence, to the outer E-ring, right where the plane impacted, and those sort of anomalies just definitely strike me as more interesting and more fruitful areas of research than getting kind of bogged down in what happened to the plane and if it could have been a plane and all that kind of stuff, because that's just my opinion. Other people may feel differently.
Yeah. If I may also add, in support of what I was referring to as the theory regarding the possible use of wall-breaching devices in order to create some of the physical evidence on scene there was, and it was captured on local live television, a massive explosion at the Pentagon that was not witnessed. It was out of view of all who were there, but it was clearly heard. It was picked up by microphones.
I saw that, the interview with Porter Goss, where he's standing there and interviewing, and then you hear the explosion go off, and he's like, well, I got to go and attend to that, and he like leaves the interview, kind of,
And there's also another one where a local correspondent is on the highway about less than half a mile from the crash scene, and it's a powerful explosion, consistent with the sounds created by rapid wall breaching devices, at least in the demonstration videos of them available on the internet. As well, I often wonder lately, many have wondered why these reported videos have been withheld for so long. And, some have speculated, well, because maybe there was not a plane present and so forth. I tend to wonder of late as to whether or not these videos have been withheld, because such videos may reveal, in fact, that the plane approached and possibly hit the building from another direction, which would be in total conflict with the official data obtained from the flight data recorders, and not wanting to be not wanting to create a controversy, an obvious one, I wonder if the federal government has thus sat on these videos for that reason.
I personally think that they're all gone. I think they've been destroyed already long ago.
Oh, yeah.
Because they destroyed so much evidence from 9/11 already. All the SEC data, and as you point out, like the chapters from your book. It's just I love the titling that you name them. It's just buildings without paper trails, planes without paper trails, and it's really that's what we have. All these documents were destroyed, and they destroyed the terabytes worth of data from the Able Danger program that Anthony Schaefer talked about, and which identified the hijackers before 9/11. And there's just case after case of that. I'm just personal. It's my opinion that those tapes are long gone. They've been destroyed.
Probably, I tend to agree. And if one needs an example, all they have to do is look at the recent Osama bin Laden alleged assassination example, after which, the Associated Press and other media made freedom of information requests of the federal government, Department of Defense, and so forth, for photos, for autopsy records, for other records related to his alleged death. And the government came back with the answer that we have no such records, meaning that some of the most important information potentially available to the public is in fact not available, because the government is either relocating it beyond freedom of information laws, or, as you said, have destroyed it. My book cites an example of one of my court battles with the FBI, where I had asked for documents related to the collection and identification of aircraft wreckage at the Pentagon, and they came back with a very suspect answer, saying that because the aircraft identities were never in question, that therefore no records were located. And initially I had thought that was some sort of ruse devised to not comply with my request. But since that time, and since the Osama bin Laden controversy that I just referred to, I have wondered if that, in fact, was provided by them as an answer in order to cover the fact that that information has either been relocated beyond the freedom of information laws or destroyed themselves, as other vitally important information has been destroyed, apparently, in this case and in other cases.
Yeah, it's just, all those, the thing is that the more speculation they can have, the less facts, and the more, I think that's really their goal here, at least it seems to be, is to get, us speculating over all sorts of things, so that, they can again call us, that conspiracy theorist label, rather than, pay attention to what the facts are, and the more they can obscure the facts and sort of muddy the waters with these ideas, I think that's their goal. It obviously is working very well, because a lot of people just don't know where to begin, and it's such a convoluted and complex web of entangled data that it's hard for anyone approaching this from the outside. I consider myself, a very intelligent person, but to a regular person who doesn't have the sort of background and research skills that I would have, I can't imagine trying to sift through this. And then who has the time to do that sort of stuff? I kind of did this while I was in college, on a lot of my spare time, and it took a massive amounts of, hours and hours away from my life that I could have been spending doing other things, that I put into research, just trying to understand what really happened that day. And not everyone has the patience or the skills to really do that and approach these topics. So it's just another thing is the whole Pentagon thing, right? If it was really a missile that hit the Pentagon, and there was no plane, of course it opens up that whole question of what happened to the original flight and all the people on board, which no one has been able to satisfactorily answer, as far as I'm aware. I've heard, those theories again that, these people were black ops operatives. A lot of them say that they were taken to, another hangar and then killed, and what they did with the bodies. There's all these sort of logistics complications in that sort of a scenario, and that really defy belief for black ops coordination and planning of what you would actually do in order to, you know, keep this all covered up and under wraps. It just it opens up a whole can of worms. And one of the big things was disinformation that sort of came out right around the time that Loose Change and Initial First Edition came out, and was promoting those, you know, the pod theories and then the missile impact theory and a lot of those other things, especially with the idea of the whole no planes thing, and that's just one of the most ridiculous, in-your-face, obvious forms of disinformation that I've seen. In my opinion, it was very, very well calculated, and I pointed out a lot of the reasons why this was done that I believe, and the main one I think is Building 7. And when you try to explain that this building wasn't hit by a plane, and anyone you try to explain that to, you know, you say that this was a third building in the World Trade Center complex that wasn't hit by a plane. And if they're already have in their mind that this is a conspiracy theorist, and they believe that no planes were used and there was holograms or whatever that hit the World Trade Center, as soon as you tell them that no plane hit Building 7, their brain is automatically immediately drawn to back to that perception. And I thought that was, you know, a very clever tactic of you know, misinformation or disinformation for, you know, really misleading people away from, you know, better evidence and theories. Because I remember when I first heard 9/11 conspiracies being covered on the news, it was on a radio station here in Boston, and the only people they allowed to call into the show, and I had been doing a little bit of research at the time, you know, into the controlled demolition stuff and the thermite evidence and stuff like that, but they were talking about these no plane theories on the radio, and I'm like, I've never ever heard this stuff before, and it's absolutely ridiculous. You know, why would they, you know, talk about that?
Well, if you consider for a moment one of the early and most significant proponents of this point of view was Morgan Reynolds,
right,
former Bush administration official. Former Treasury Secretary, perhaps, or
Bush economist.
Department of Labor. He was an economist. Yeah, I think he was an associate director of some major agency, and you know, he was singing all the right tunes for the first 6 months to a year of his presence on the so-called 9/11 truth scene, and then suddenly he flipped to this no plane point of view, and so if anyone is wondering about why this whole theory has arisen, one should just consider the source.
Yeah, Morgan Reynolds, he's a former Bush insider, and that's really what they would do in disinformation, is they have someone come out with credible information at first. And I noticed that he really teamed up with Judy Wood too, with the whole Scholars for 9/11 Truth, and he sort of teamed up with Judy Wood, and Judy Wood came first on the scene, and she did all these really great calculations disproving the pancake effect and showing how, you know, the building couldn't have pancaked down in the times and the conservation of momentum of the floors and everything. And she kind of came on the scene as a real credible you know, researcher with some good calculations and information. And then out of nowhere, she came out with the whole theory that the Star Wars defense program could somehow be used, weaponized, to take down large steel frame structures in a coordinated demolition, which was just really beyond my belief personally as a physicist and someone who really understands, you know, the capabilities of these masers and microwave technologies and how they work to. You know, it's essentially like a microwave uses a certain frequency which is tuned exactly to the bond angle in a water molecule, so that it heats up water molecules and nothing else. It's sort of the way that the frequency is tuned to these water molecules, so that it will heat up the water molecules in your food and won't really heat up other things. And it's the same kind of way that these directed energy weapons, which do exist and were designed by the Star Wars defense program, are used to intercept incoming ICBMs. And they will have these frequencies which are specifically tuned to uranium and plutonium cores, so that they will fry out the core and disable the nuclear device before, you know, it can be intercepted. and before it can, come and do its damage and stuff. And that's sort of how these weapons work. And a lot of these people that really support the DEW theory, I don't think they really understand what energy is and how energy works, because and any kind of, as Niels Harrit pointed out when he was asked a question about Judy Wood's research, he says that energy is a concept which is used in physics for calculations, and this is an this is an equal sign in these calculations. It says that energy before equals energy after, always, and it's exact. It's not almost this much. It's not like a little bit that much. These are exact calculations for energy, and it's very very exact, and is able to calculate. We're able to calculate exactly how much energy is needed. And he also points out that all weapons that you could even possibly name, except for with the one exception of biological weapons, all weapons are directed energy weapons of one form or another, because basically that's what you're doing. You're directing energy, and that's where all the interesting physics happens, is when energy is transferred from either one object to another or changes form from one form to another. That's what physics studies, and it studies it exactly using mathematical equations. And these sort of weapons, I pointed out, they do exist. They were developed by the Star Wars Defense Program for intercepting incoming ICBMs. But they do not have the energetic capabilities, nor the precision and the timing and accuracy and all the other aspects that I've pointed out for taking down a large building like this and vaporizing it. And the technology to do that's never been experimentally demonstrated. It's never been shown that you can have these sort of effects from electromagnetic weapons. And the main thing is the energy calculations. I mean, I've been to Ground Zero. I went there in 2008 for not the anniversary of 9/11. And to see the size of that level of destruction, and to really wrap your head around how much energy it would have required to take those buildings down, that the way they fell, and completely the pulverization of the concrete, and just the massive destruction that was observed there on 9/11, it defies my logic to believe that this could have been provided by these types of weapons. And I just think it's interesting. That's my whole take on the whole thing. It's the fact that she teamed up with Morgan Reynolds is just even more. It's kind of in your face. That these people are the attempted infiltration of the movement, and the fact that she's done more to go on every underground conspiracy radio show across the country than she has to sort of develop scientific validity for her theories. It's just really telling of her agenda, in my opinion.
Oh, sure. Her approach to the whole matter is so much less than scientific. The examples of evidence that she cites are just almost childish. For example, and not only childish, but simply wrong. For example, World Trade Center Building 3, the hotel next to Trade Center Tower number 1.
Yeah, Marriott Hotel.
Yes, it was crushed by the fall of Trade Center number 2, and there are photos of it showing it before Building 1 fell, and there's a huge gouge taken out of the building as a result of the collision with the debris of Building 2, and Judy Wood has gone everywhere and said that is evidence of a directed energy weapon that just happened to miss the World Trade Center and hit the building next door.
Right, and it missed the World Trade Center and hit those toasted cars and all the other things she cites. The thing that gets me is if it's inaccurate enough to do that, then how is it accurate enough to take down a building? It's just...
Right. And there, even in spite of the fact that there are pictures that show the debris crushing the building, she has gone up and said this on national radio, national TV. She's also alleged that the burned cars around Ground Zero are evidence of directed energy that missed the World Trade Center and hit these cars, and said, well, if the directed energy had hit the World Trade Center, as she said, we would also have seen these effects unfolding upon the outer structure of the World Trade Center as this energy was hitting it, if it had hit, as she says. Right. There's no evidence of that. So
also,
there's another reason.
I had pointed out...
There's another reason for the cars. There's another reason for the car damage.
there's plenty of other reasons that could explain all the so-called anomalies that she says are suggestive of directed energy weapons, and there's other explanations for all that. I mean, people have commented on the paper. If it was, these thermite explosives, how did it not burn all the paper? And I mean, these were the two largest office buildings in the entire world. I mean, to think that some paper wouldn't survive a demolition is just defies logic. To believe that, of course, that there's going to be paper left over. These were the two largest office buildings. They probably contain more paper than any other single building in New York City.
And I recall also that she was on Coast to Coast AM overnight with George Norrie once discussing these theories, and had made the claim without any valid corroborating evidence that the reason people were jumping from the buildings and taking off their shirts before they had done so was because they had perspired so much in the heat up there that the directed energy weapons caused their shirts to become so painful through heating that they had to remove them, and then they therefore later had to jump out of the buildings because they could no longer stand the energy, the heat created by the energy weapons.
No, that one's pretty ridiculous, but I think I got one that tops that, Aidan, and it was the claim that she made on Coast to Coast AM and with George Norrie. I believe it was in May of 2011. You can look up the episode and listen, and she says this. She claims that the nanothermite that was discovered in the dust is a distraction from directed energy weapons, and that this was just dustified building components and building materials. That somehow that these DEWs that she claims exist have the ability to produce nanothermites and layered nanomatrix nanothermites, that she has a beam weapon that can literally on demand just produce nanothermite.
I think she's crazy like a fox. I believe that one needs to consider the effect that she has upon listeners in order to understand the real clever approach that she may purposely be taken, because when one hears these things, when one layperson, reasonable person hears these things, they will automatically disregard any more plausible discussion of evidence from other credible researchers of this topic.
Right.
And I think that maybe the whole reason for her existence is to scare away the listener from other reasonable people who want to discuss this topic rationally.
That's a good take on it. I mean, it's definitely the whole thing that she comes out so violently attacking nanothermite and trying to debunk and discredit the nanothermite evidence, which is, some of the best evidence that has ever come out for, what could have actually been used to take down the buildings. The fact that she comes out and attacks it so, fiercely and with such illogical claims that, that somehow this beam weapon could have, removed all the steel impurities like manganese and carbon and left it with, and then oxidized it to this, this is Fe3O5 oxidation. This is not just regular iron oxide or rust. This is, super amounts of oxygen had to be pumped into these materials in order to get them to that state, and of course that oxygen is needed for the reaction to take place at a more high speed, and just to assume that without any evidence or any sort of scientific backing or documentation, to assume that this beam weapon could just produce these nanothermites, which have a nanoscale matrix, and as Kevin Ryan shows in his video where he makes the stuff, you need an organic compound for the matrix to adhere to in order to get that sort of nanoscale layering and the lattice structure. Really, it's not possible to just do that in midair with some sort of microwave laser. As far as I'm aware, I could be wrong.
I'm just astonished that anyone has taken her seriously, but yet you go to the review sections of her book at Amazon, and there are just so many rabid supporters of her that seem rational, in spite of the fact that her approach and her theories are.
I wonder how many of them are actual, real people, or if there's,
Yes.
disinformation campaigns. Because, I mean, I don't necessarily believe that she could be a disinformation agent herself. And as I pointed out, I mean, if you read the CIA's documents and how they do these types of things, I refer to page 85 of CIA Diary by Philip Agee, where he says that, agent is a word that's used to describe people who work at the end of the line. They're not case officers. These are people that, usually foreigners or usually people outside the agency that they can approach and sort of prop up. And the agency will actively seek out these people and prop them up and give them support and through other means,
Sure.
and I'm sure that would explain how she got on every single radio show in North America, and how she got a website up and all this backing and support, a publishing deal and a book. I mean,
how she got to Jesse Ventura and amazingly got her disinformation within his program
on mainstream television, And Jesse
Unfortunate.
Ventura is not a scientist. He does not have the technical abilities. And what really just makes me, yeah, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around the technical capabilities of this. Of course, he goes and looks at a laser beam and a Van de Graaff generator and concludes that, it's the only logical conclusion that these types of weapons, it must have brought the buildings down. But the fact that Jesse Ventura is a former UDT, underwater demolitions team, that's the precursor, the frogmen, precursors to the SEALs. He was a Navy SEAL before there were Navy SEAls. The fact that he's an expert in demolition, was trained by the military in demolitions, but yet buys into a theory like that, it's just a little bit weird. I don't understand where that came from. And what I think happened is, these people somehow infiltrated him. I know that he was talking about this on Alex Jones, that he got Judy Wood's book and he started reading it, and that these people really pushed it on him because they're rabid. I mean, I've had to block these people from my channel because they will literally fill up 10 comments with their, spam about how, awesome Judy Wood is and how much, how
Right.
all this evidence for nanothermite can be discredited, and none of it's logical or makes sense, but it seems well written and seems well thought out, and to anyone who's not educated looking at that will kind of, be swayed and actually believe this stuff. And I can't imagine that there are people out there that, especially with what I've seen from Cass Sunstein and the advocation of infiltration of cognitive infiltration of conspiracy groups. I can't imagine this a better example of that in action.
Right.
Than this, because and the main thing is, right, you get to the issue of where did the energy come from. And when I ask these people, I understand that these DEWs exist. I know their capabilities. I know what they're used for. I tell them the analogy I told you about the microwave and water molecules and the plutonium cores and stuff like that. Where does the energy come from? And the answer I get from these people is that it came from Hurricane Erin somehow, or HARP, and I also get the answer that it was free energy, because Judy Wood, in the title of her book, she talks about free energy technology. And
Right.
to say that free energy is how they, provided the energy to take down those buildings and the energetics requirements, it's just absurd and ridiculous, because then why did we need to go in Iraq to gain control of the oil and everything else that was involved? If they have free energy, then why are we fighting all these wars over oil and trying to build pipelines through the Caspian Sea and everything else? There's just so much of it that doesn't make sense to me. And
I've always wondered how authentic her support really is.
right, and I've challenged these people to get on a debate with me and talk with me live like this. Get on a Skype call. We'll go over this all on Skype and record it. We'll have a debate on this. And I have not heard a single one of them who will accept my challenge. And it's on the table anytime they want to do it. I've even asked other people to have a debate with me and Judy Wood on radio shows, and I've tried to call in on radio shows when she's on. I can never seem to get through on the line to get on air with her and sort of ask her the types of scientific questions that I know she won't be able to answer.
Right, which perhaps betrays their true roles or true purposes.
Yeah, well, not all of them. A lot of people they're just misled, or they don't know any better, and they really believe this stuff for whatever reasons. I don't say that all of them out there who support this are intentionally spreading disinformation. A lot of them are just misinformed or just underinformed and not really knowledgeable about the science and the capabilities and the better evidence that exists out there, and why there'd be an active cognitive infiltration campaign to mislead people away from that.
I invite people to examine the evidence regarding the aircraft attacks, and also want to note that I think one of the aircraft attacks are one of the big stumbling blocks for researchers of the event, because so many have just assumed that what they've been told on television is true. They see the faces of the accused. They assume that a plane has to be flown by a human being in order to be directed anywhere. And this is not true in the case of aviation automation, and it's also unproven in the case of the accused. There's no evidence, hard evidence, that any of them, specifically the ones specifically accused, actually flew the planes as alleged. We always see on retro programs or news broadcasts, Mohammed Atta, Ziad Jarrah, others piloted each plane. The federal government, in fact, does not know this, and they have no hard evidence to support it. But the media runs with the myth, and it's turned into reality through repetition. And I just invite the listener and observer to consider other possibilities and escape the propaganda.
Exactly. Well, thank you for your time. This is Aidan Monaghan. He wrote Declassifying 9/11 is his new book. It's got tons of actual documents from government documents regarding 9/11 that were filed through Freedom of Information Acts. And he's pretty much one of the top guys out there that you can talk to for understanding, the planes and the aircraft anomalies that occurred on 9/11. I thank him for his time and the great service that he's doing for our country and the truth.
Thanks a lot, Jeremy.
All right, take care.
Okay, you too. Good talking to you. Thanks again. Look forward to hearing it.